Hey there, how's it going? My name's Stephen Bell. I'm a professor of practice at the University of Kansas in the criminal justice department. That's pretty much a teaching position. And what I do at the University of Kansas is uh, build curriculum, I develop courses, and then I end up teaching a lot of the criminal justice courses. I've taught, not just at the University of Kansas, but in some of my other faculty positions, I've taught just a ton of different criminal justice courses from the beginning of a curriculum at the university level, which would be like the introduction to criminal justice. I've taught criminology. Uh, I've taught juvenile justice and corrections and policing. Just run the gamut of different courses that I've taught. But when I look back and I think, like, how did I end up in this position? Like, what road brought me to being a professor of criminal justice, especially at the University of Kansas? I just have to shake my head. I'm going to share a little bit about my story with you tonight, and just kind of bring you on a little journey with me on how it is I ended up here at the University of Kansas. When I was growing up, I definitely didn't think I was going to be an academic. I really only had two professions in mind after I realized I was going to be a professional baseball player, uh, which took me up until all of about 9 or 10 years old before I realized, okay, probably not going to go professional in baseball. All I wanted to do was either be a fighter pilot in the Air Force or be a police officer. That's all. I would say a two-track mind, not quite a one-track mind, but those are the only two things I ever want to do: fighter pilot in the Air Force or be a police officer. And I remember thinking, like, how does anyone even become a police officer? You have to bear in mind, this is before the internet was super prevalent and you could access it anywhere, especially on phone or anywhere you were. And I remember thinking, I just have no idea how you become a police officer. In high school, when I became my first job, I became a cook at a fast food restaurant, and I just went in and asked for an application. I thought, well, you can't do that to be a police officer. You can't just go to the police station and say, hey, I want a job. Nobody, what are you, crazy? So I just literally had no idea how to make that part of my dream come true. So after I finished high school, I kind of put that on the back burner. Went to college like I was expected to. I wasn't a great student in high school. I got by. Kind of got by on my testing. I wasn't great at getting my homework done, and things like that. Some would call me a lazy student. And so when I went to college, it wasn't really a great fit for those first couple years. I struggled a little bit and acclimating to uh, going to classes that I didn't necessarily need to go to. Nobody was sitting there waking me up every day and making sure I went to class. And so after my sophomore year uh, in college, I realized, like, I might have to make a change here. And I realized kind of that change I kind of had a plan already. And I remember thinking, well, you wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Now, in order to be a pilot, you need to be an officer, and I'm only at my sophomore year in college, and I needed to make a change now. So I amended my plan, and I ended up joining the Air Force, or at least going to a recruiter to join the Air Force, and just saying to myself, what jobs are available? I asked this recruiter what jobs are available. We went over a few jobs, this and that, mechanic and munitions, and what is there. And at some point, the recruiter ended up listing all these jobs, and the job that he listed next was police officer. The military needs military police officers, and I thought, heck yeah, why not? That that's exactly what I want to do. I get to be a police officer and I get to be in the Air Force. Best of both worlds. Let's do it. Sign me up. And that's exactly what I did. I spent 4 years in the Air Force as a police officer stationed in Southern California. I got to have great weather. I got to be introduced to the world of law enforcement. Granted, it wasn't municipal policing, but it was military policing. But I got to be introduced to it, and I got to see what it was all about, and I got to see some of the realities of law enforcement. In fact, it may not have been municipal or big city policing, but towards the end of my 4 years, we had a pretty tragic event that happened at Edwards Air Force Base that year. My supervisor was killed on a traffic stop. was shot to death on a traffic stop right before I got out, and that's a real eye opener. All this time in the military as a military police officer, I remember thinking, you know what? I mean, I'm in law enforcement, but am I really in law enforcement? Am I am I a real cop, quote unquote? Well, I mean, uh, Bobby Butler, no matter what you tell him or his family or any of us now, Bobby Butler died that night as a law enforcement officer, and that really was a quick awakening into the realities of the dangers in that profession. And there were some of us that night that were working that just told themselves this job isn't for me, and there are others of us that told ourselves, yeah, this is exactly what I. And I was in that second group, and what I ended up doing right around the end of my 4 years in the Air Force, I ended up talking to some reservists. There were reserve military members, people part of the Air Force Reserves that would come and do their weekend a month, 2 weeks a year at Edwards. And I would talk to them, and their day job, their regular job, was as an LAPD officer. And because we were in Southern California, that was a really close base for them. And so I got to hear a lot about the LAPD, and it really piqued my interest. And I thought, well, who hasn't heard of the LAPD? Who wouldn't want to be a member of a large organization like that? A famous organization like that, so many opportunities in an agency that has, around 10,000 sworn officers and 14,000 total employees. So I drove down to Los Angeles and I did what I didn't know how to do as a police officer, as wanting to be a police officer when I was younger. I literally went and put in an application. You drove down to the personnel building near City Hall, and at that time, you put in an application, you filled out an application, you took the test that night. And that's what I did, and I progressed through the hiring process. I ended up passing the written test, background investigation, the polygraph, the physical agilities test, the medical. And about a year later, I got a letter in the mail asking me if I wanted to be in the next academy class. Before you know it, my time was up with the Air Force. Uh, my offer with the Los Angeles Police Department was in hand, and it was March 15th of 1999. That was my first day of the LAPD Academy, and there I was standing on the black line, getting yelled at by the LAPD Academy drill instructors and made to do push-ups while we were wearing suits and all kinds of stuff. And I wouldn't have had it any way. I loved it. I loved every minute. I ended up graduating from the police academy, and immediately, just like most officers in LAPD, immediately upon graduating the academy, I got sent to patrol. My very first assignment in patrol, what we call an LAPD, your probationary assignment, just to make sure that you can meet the standards on probation. You pass probation. My first probationary assignment was in Foothill Division of LAPD. A lot of folks may not recognize that division by its name, Foothill Division, but what made that division famous years before I joined was that's the location of the Rodney King incident. So Rodney King happened in Foothill, and while it happened before I got there, years before I got there, there were still some after effects. I mean, people were still talking about it. It was still evident that impact still existed. So I did a year there. A year is a standard length of probation in the LAPD, and then I got sent to my first, for lack of a better word, my first real assignment, kind of standalone, where I get to be a grown up, and I don't have a training officer, and I can work with other peer officers. And I got sent to downtown Los Angeles, Skid Row, Central Station, and that place was a shocking eye opener. I had never experienced the level what Skid Row really was, the level of homelessness and open air drug sales, and just the what I thought was just insanity. This lawless environment, and it was crazy to see. But I spent, well, I know exactly how long I spent there. I spent 74 months in downtown. I counted every single one of those months before I ended up getting a transfer away from there, and I ended up going back to the valley and spending some time in the valley where Foothill was. So another part of the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. So a little bit more of a suburban environment instead of a downtown Skid Row environment. But that's kind of how my LAPD career started. I ended up having a ton of really exciting and fulfilling assignments after that. I taught at the LAPD Academy. I taught law, and that's really where I got my when I got hired there to teach the academy. That's where I got my first taste of teaching, and I thought I could do this. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed being an educator and kind of developing folks and coming to that moment where maybe they didn't quite understand something, but now they do, and I was able to guide them. So I thought, put that in my back pocket. Uh, maybe I could do this in another environment. Uh, From there, after about 2 years in the teaching at the academy, I was selected for my first, what turned out to be my first undercover assignment. So I ended up going back to what we call operations. I went back to a police station, and I ended up working one of the LAPD vice units. And vice, uh, essentially in that world, deals with crimes of human trafficking, prostitution, alcohol related crimes, gambling related crimes, things like that, the vices of society. I did that for a decent amount of time before I promoted and ended up becoming a detective with LAPD, specializing in you know what I never saw coming. I never expected to, but I spent the bulk of my time as a detective working in sexual assault crimes, interviewing and arresting sexual assault suspects, and really putting some what I would call what we would refer to as really bad guys in jail, nothing in prison. And I really enjoyed that, but as time goes on, you have a desire, a desire develops to promote. So I became a detective supervisor, and from there I became a sergeant with the LAPD. And as the one of many circles that have come back into full circle in my life, I ended up going back to that first undercover assignment, and as a sergeant, I was a supervisor in that vice unit, and I ended up supervising those undercover operations for gambling and human trafficking and alcohol related crimes. And so between those assignments, I spent some time in plain clothes and doing some surveillance here and there, running some surveillance units and gang units. But all that really rounded out just a really, really varied and unique career for me. Things that I just never really thought I would experience. One, in a big city, you know, when I was growing up, I went to high school in a little town in Kansas called Hiawatha. I grew up as the son of a preacher. My father was a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. My great grandfather was a preacher. I'm the only male in my generation. So when I decided not to be a preacher, that meant that it had to, that chain, that streak had to stop. But I just didn't have that in me. That didn't have that calling in me. I did have a calling to be a police officer, and I was able to take that opportunity and have a career that I just wouldn't trade for anything. Now, rewind a little bit and remember that when I joined the Air Force, I had only finished my sophomore year, so I realized early on in my LAPD career I need to go back to school, and that's exactly what I did. I went back to school and I finished my bachelor's degree. Realized that as time went on and I kind of grew that love for teaching, I thought, well, if I want to teach either in this career or after my LAPD career, I need to have some sort of graduate degree. So I ended up going back to school again and finishing my master's. I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, and then I had an opportunity to get my master's in criminal justice as well, criminal justice and public administration. I looked at my opportunities as my career was coming to an end, uh, not immediate end, but as I was looking forward and I had just a few years left, and I thought, well, if I really want to secure an opportunity to teach, especially at the university level, I've got to have a PhD. I mean that is what, in my experience, was going to be necessary to secure the job that I want. And so I ended up going back again, and I went back to school, and it was a tough road to hoe. I'd love to sit here and tell you it was a breeze, but after a few years and 180 pages of writing a dissertation, I finished my PhD right around the time that I finished my LAPD career. Now, that career, I look back and realized, oh my gosh, I've had a blast. But I came on fairly young. I did 22 years with the LAPD. I came on in my very late 20s. And so I realized I've got a lot of time and I can not only have a great LAPD career, but I can transition into an academic career. I mean, the time that I spent with LAPD was like I said, was a blast. I mean, you talk about the time on Skid Row. Look, I'll share a story. Right around the middle of my time there in Central Station, Skid Row, downtown Los Angeles, I remember getting flagged down by somebody and being told, "Hey, right around the corner, there's a lady just screaming, laying on the sidewalk and screaming." Now, you and I may hear that story and think, "Oh my gosh, there must be some sort of emergency." But if you spend years on this Skid Row, this downtown LA, in this lawless environment that is just an open air drug use and drug sales market, it is not that uncommon to see somebody that is experiencing mental illness crises, or somebody is under the influence of narcotics or narcotic induced psychosis, or just screaming while lying on the sidewalk is not that uncommon, unfortunately. So my partner and we went around the corner, and indeed we saw a young lady lying on the sidewalk screaming. It wasn't. We got out of the car to just make sure to see what aid we could render, see if she needs some medical attention, call an ambulance. Obviously, some sort of crisis, medical, mental. We don't know quite yet. And as we got closer, we realized that not only is she very, very pregnant, she's about to not be pregnant because she's in the middle of labor. She is highly in the influence of narcotics and giving birth at the same time. At this point, I had never experienced labor. I to this day I don't have children, and at this point, my partner, she didn't have children, and we didn't know what we were doing. But I knew that there was a baby about to arrive in this world, and we needed to do something. Uh, Fortunately for us, we were driving a police car where somebody had driven that car the shift before us, and they had forgotten their jacket and left it in the trunk. Well, their jacket is what caught that baby, and we ended up catching that baby literally in my hands while holding that jacket and bringing that baby into this world before the ambulance could arrive. And that type of experience where I think, well, how did I end up here? How did I end up catching a baby on Skid Row from small town Iowa? That's the kind of, when I say like I had a great career and I have no regrets. That's the kind of story that I tell. I mean, I was able to have highs like that where I was able to be a part of bringing a life into this world, and then I had crazy, crazy lows too. I've gone through many partners. Partners in the LAPD are somebody you work with on a semi-permanent basis, and so you develop pretty good relationships, just not unlike what you see in TV and the movies, where police have partners in big cities they work with every single day. You get to know them, you get to know their family, you spend time with them at work, you spend time with them away from work. And I've had two of my partners that have died while I was in the job. And you talk about the high of highs of bringing life in this world, and then the low of lows of somebody that you work with every single day dying. And now tomorrow, what are you going to do? They're not there. Uh, it, it's it was devastating the first time. It was no less devastating the second time. And I again, I asked myself, like, how did you end up? You were just a small town kid, like you were a preacher's kid in a small town, and now here you are at a funeral for your partner, and where do you go from here? Just all these questions in my head. I was given some real fun opportunities to in those undercover assignments where we got to do things like infiltrate protests, or if there was known to be if we were following somebody, sometimes we have to follow folks into bars or gentlemen's clubs. I remember one time we got assigned to, there was an impromptu Foo Fighters concert, the band, the Foo Fighters. And they did an impromptu concert in a small venue, small bar in Los Angeles, and we got assigned. My unit got assigned to go into that bar to look for somebody. And I thought, here I am getting paid to watch the Foo Fighters. How did I end up? But all good things come to an end, and it was time to retire. I ended up finishing my PhD right around the time that I finished my 22nd year with Los Angeles Police Department, and I thought, well, here's my perfect opportunity. I can retire honorably. I've got a graduate degree. I've got, at that point, I had just a little bit of teaching experience in the academy, a little bit of adjunct teaching experience, which is to say part-time teaching experience, kind of like a moonlighting, a side gig, where I was teaching some online classes at a school called Geneva College. And I thought, well, here's my time to strike out and become a member of academia. And I was able to secure a full-time faculty position in North Carolina, and I packed my bags and I drove my truck and everything I owned to North Carolina. And next thing you know, I'm teaching full-time, and I, enjoying every minute of that too. It's different, but it's still a blast. I'm learning how to teach, learning classroom management, learning the topics, learning the subjects. When you teach for the first time, you may be familiar with the criminal justice world. I had 3 degrees at that point in criminal justice. I'd been in the criminal justice arena for 22 years, 26 if you count the LAPD, or if you count the Air Force. So just because you've been in it, just because you have degrees, doesn't mean you know every topic. So I remember doing a lot of studying and having to, learn the topics before I teach them. From there, I realized that, just like I had a desire to promote in the military, I had a desire to promote in the LAPD, I had a desire to promote in academia. And there was a position that opened up at a 4-year university that was a 10-year track position. And it was in South Dakota, at a small university in South Dakota, and I jumped on it. I threw my hat in the ring. Next thing you know, I was packing my truck up, everything I owned. I was driving back across the country. I was driving to South Dakota to become an assistant professor of criminal justice in South Dakota, because when you're an academic, tenure is an important thing. And I just kept thinking about my roots. I was there in South Dakota for a couple years, and I remember thinking, who doesn't want to go home? I grew up as a Jayhawk fan. I grew up watching KU basketball. I've been a Jayhawk fan my whole life, and wouldn't you know it, a position opened up at the University of Kansas. And I thought, how can I turn this down? I got to throw my hat. I'll be kicking myself if I don't try to get this position. I applied many rounds of interviews, multiple rounds of interviews, and next thing you know, packing my truck, driving a few states away from South Dakota down to Kansas, and I land in Lawrence, Kansas, and I end up as a professor of practice with the University of Kansas, Rock Chalk. That's kind of how I ended up not only having a great career in criminal justice as far as a practitioner with the Air Force as a military police officer, but also with the Los Angeles Police Department, all those varied assignments. And I'm just so happy I did every one of those steps. Some folks, they think it may be hard to go back to school. Remember, I left after my sophomore year, so I was an adult learner when I went back. And I remember seeing, it wasn't that long ago, it was after I finished my degrees, but I remember seeing that and thinking, man, I wish I had seen this meme sooner. And it said something along the lines of, if you're putting something off, like going back to school, because you're going to be 40 when you finish, guess what? You're still going to be 40 if you finish or not. And I wish I had seen that when I was younger. I remember thinking, like, oh, should I go back to school? Should I not? I knew I should, but I kind of had a lot of these fun assignments, and I kept delaying it a little bit at the beginning of my career. And I thought, well, do I want to go back? I had that same thoughts, at that point, probably closer to 30. But, do I want to go back to school because I'm going to be 30 when I finished my degree. Well, guess what? I turned 30 with or without a degree. I was going to turn 30. With or without a master's, I was going to turn 35, and with or without a PhD, I was going to turn 40. So why not go back? That's what I say. I have a passion for folks who are adult learners and actually take those steps to go back. I can see myself in the shoes of undergraduates who are 17. I started college when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. And I can also see myself in the shoes of adult learners who come back. It's something that I impress upon every single person. Education got me where I am today. Education got me some of the successes I had in the LAPD, at least for some of the promotional opportunities. I would not have been able to go back and supervise that undercover unit if I didn't have the degree that qualified me to promote to become the rank necessary to supervise that. Academics and scholarly work got me into academia. It got me into my first adjuncting position. It got me into my first full-time faculty position. It got me into a tenure track position. And then it got me to what I would consider my dream job at the University of Kansas, a premier university where I got to bring it again back full circle and come back home. So I encourage anybody. Education is going to open those doors. Education gave me the amazing career I had in LAPD, and it gave me the amazing second career that I've had in academia, whether it be in adjuncting, North Carolina, South Dakota, or the University of Kansas. Rock chalk.